Welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name's of course Csaw or Chris, and today we're talking about Guild Wars 2 in 2021. Now, yesterday there was a huge event / livestream thing for End of Dragons, which is Guild Wars 2's third expansion. At this livestream, they announced a lot of the core features of the expansion itself, as well as the release month and actually the ability to pre-purchase the expansion with its different pricing model and stuff like that. So there's a bunch of information we got. I want to kind of summarize it in this video, but I really want to spend time kind of highlighting the key features and elements that I think are really important for this expansion that are going to help carry Guild Wars 2 into the future, and also talk about some of the features or aspects that I don't like, because there's definitely a mix here, and I'd say there's a mix every single time Guild Wars 2 announces an expansion or anything they're going to do. So I'm definitely going to give my take on either side. Just before we jump in though, I should mention I am a Guild Wars 2 or ArenaNet partner. Does this mean I'll say nothing but good things about Guild Wars 2? No, as I just stated, I will say the good, I will say the bad, and I will say the ugly if there is ugly. But what it does mean is that there are 2 referral links in the description box below. These are sponsored links by ArenaNet. If you use them, you will help out my channel. You can use it to either try out the game for free, or you can use it to buy the new Guild Wars 2 expansions. And if you're someone who's considering purchasing the expansion and you're going to buy it anyways, this is free for you to use and it helps me out a lot. So if there was ever a time to consider those links, this is the time. And that's all I'm going to say about it. But let's dive into the video. Alrighty, so let's get into it. The most important piece of information first, the actual expansion launches February 2022. Now, if you're someone who missed a bit of an update post they did, I'd say about a month ago, I'm not entirely sure though, they did end up delaying the original release date, which was supposed to be slated for the end of 2021. So it is a significant change, about, half a year, maybe a bit more. But I think anyone in the MMO space would agree that it's better to wait and ship a finished product instead of giving us one more unfinished, terrible, unpolished expansion beforehand. And it's always better to wait. So I'm super happy to see this, despite being disappointed, obviously, that I'm not playing the expansion sooner. Now, in terms of pricing, we're looking at $29.99 USD for the actual expansion itself, just the standalone End of Dragons. Once again, one of the best values you could ever have for an MMO. It's so good, the pricing for the amount of content you get. If it's anywhere of equivalent to Path of Fire or Heart of Thorns, which I assume it will be from what we've learned today, it's going to be well worth that $29.99. Now, if you're someone who hasn't played Guild Wars 2 and you're like, do I get the other expansions with this? You do not get it from the just standalone purchase. You have to buy the collections. The collections version, which you can find kind of all on the same page in their web store, is $49.99. So it is a significant jump. But once again, when you're comparing these prices to other MMOs and some of the MMOs that have sub fees, it's still such a good value. So even at $49.99, getting all 3 of those and just being like completely caught up is a great deal, at least from my point of view. I mean, obviously everyone has their own value measurements, so you make that decision for yourself. But I think it is a great place for them to start. Now, the actual event itself went really well. I kind of watched the VOD after the fact, so I didn't kind of get the live part of it, but I get to watch the chat on the side, so I still kind of get to see the reaction of the crowd, and it was kind of as expected for a lot of the things that are announced. The very first thing that we talk about is the story, and of all the things I'm concerned about in Guild Wars 2, I mean, the actual arc of the story I'm a bit concerned about, but the way the story is delivered is just so masterfully done. Like, if it's anything at all close to Path of Fire, I'm going to be extremely happy. There's definitely some story beats I didn't love, but Path of Fire in general, just the way it was delivered, the way you interacted with the story, it was done. It's probably my favorite way an MMO delivers story. Just not removing you, not changing the way you interact with the game, and just delivering a fully voiced narrative on top of your gameplay. It just feels so good, and it's such a immersive way to receive story. Now, the actual story steps itself could be a bit of a question. Obviously, they're going back to Cantha. They did that in Guild Wars 1, so there's definitely a bit of space there for there to be a lot of fan service. I'm a little bit concerned about that because I haven't played Guild Wars 1. I was concerned about that with the Crystal Desert as well, and that didn't end up being a big issue. But it's definitely something that's on my mind when I hear about all of the Cantha places we're going to be returning to and stuff like that. They did make a point to state in like the actual like dev kind of interviews where they did mention that there's going to be some stuff for veterans of the franchise, but it's also going to be very accessible and below a lot of new players or new to the area people's minds as well. So they're definitely thinking about that, which I think is already really good. And from my experience, you know, hey, there was stuff I missed out on in terms of impact from the Path of Fire expansion and Heart of Thorns, but I definitely appreciated everything. And if anything, it made me want to dig deeper into the lore, do more research, watch a bunch of Wooden Potato videos, so it was a good thing either way. They then go on to talk about the actual open world and map design. This is something that I'm truly not at all concerned about. I think every expansion, including the actual core game and Living World, they always hit it out of the park. In terms of design and beauty and stuff like that, it's so well executed. It's so fun to explore these maps. I'm just super excited that we get a bunch of them at once, and I'm really excited to see what they do. And they do give us a bit of a hint here. One of the big things that they say at this point, and they bring this up at different times throughout it, is they kind of want to take the best parts of Path of Fire and the best parts of Heart of Thorns and really meld them together. And one key example they give is taking the verticality of Heart of Thorns and then putting that with kind of the different ways you can traverse the land in Path of Fire. So putting those together does sound like a really, really enjoyable map. I think there's definitely parts of Heart of Thorns that you miss when you're playing Path of Fire and vice versa. So I think the idea that they're looking at both of them and trying to take those best parts will hopefully work out really, really well. We get to see a bunch of stunning concept art as well as a few shots in game, but it's definitely mostly concept art, which we know they're awesome at doing anyways. So I'm really curious to see some of these places once they're more fleshed out. The other big thing that we can take away, based on some features that we'll talk about just in a second, there's probably going to be a lot of water in these maps for different reasons. And this is great because Guild Wars 2 already does pretty well with water. I mean, yes, the underwater skills aren't necessarily balanced as well as they could be, but the actual underwater experience in Guild Wars 2 compared to a lot of MMOs is vastly superior. So the idea of having this water and some new ways to play with it is going to be a lot of fun, I think. And the first of these water activities we get is fishing. That's right. One of the new features for Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons is going to be fishing. I think this is something that people have wanted in Guild Wars 2 for a really long time. Certainly as someone who's been playing a bit of the New World beta recently, it's something that I've kind of fallen in love with again, especially in games that have such beauty that if you can kind of take the moment to pause and really enjoy your surroundings while doing, fishing, kind of like you do in the real world, it really amplifies the ambience of the world, which I think is super fun. The other big things here, there's going to be boats as well, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second, that will allow people to kind of fish in different locations. So there's a really nice component here that the two major features of fishing and boats work really, really well together, and they are going to synergize hopefully very well with the maps. And like I say, there's probably going to be a lot of water there. The other big thing though, and I think this is beneficial to the entire franchise or the entire set of expansions and base game, is that fishing is not just going to be in Cantha. It's something that you're going to do everywhere, and in fact it's something you're going to have to do everywhere to collect different types of fish. So all of a sudden you've made this activity that's new and fresh to the game that brings people back to these old zones. New players going through the game are going to stumble upon people fishing and be all curious about it and stuff like that, and it's going to make the world feel more alive. And for veteran players who have had no reason to go to certain places, I mean, they do some things with different world boss events and stuff like that, but it's going to be a nice additional thing to bring people back to maps that they might have loved and forgotten about. So I think it's just a really great system, and it's something that hopefully they'll keep adding on, right? Like, if there's a fourth expansion, we're hopefully going to bring fishing into it and have all these new fish to catch, right? That's the other thing, is that there's going to be some sort of collection revolving around fishing where you have to collect all of them and hopefully get something pretty cool. I mean, a legendary fishing rod would be pretty amazing, but who knows if that'll be the case. But I'm pretty excited to see what they do with this. So the next thing then we should talk about are the boats themselves, or as Aurene has been calling them, the skiffs. Now, these are a little bit different than what I imagined when I thought, hey, Guild Wars 2 might be getting boats. I thought of like sailboats or like naval ships and open ocean kind of sailing and stuff like that. But this is definitely more on the scale of like rivers and lakes, and it's kind of like a larger canoe by the look of it. And I mean, I assume that there'll be kind of skins and stuff like that. If I know ArenaNet and Guild Wars 2, there'll probably be some sort of skinning option you have for it to pimp out your ride. But it does look a lot of fun. The big thing here is that you can actually take multiple people on these boats. So you can have I think it's up to 5 people that can be there. And they're a lot of fun. The big selling point that they kind of had here is that you could go fishing with all your friends, and you could drive to your favorite spot to cast your hooks in and sort of hang out on the boat like a raft, which does sound really cool. And it does play into the whole fishing thing, which, you know, if you think about fishing in the real world, bonding is one of the key reasons people go to fish. So it does really allow for that kind of activity. That being said, it's obviously a mode of transport. I think there's going to be a lot of water in these maps, and it is tied to a mastery track as well. And when we think back to some of the other mastery tracks we've had, there's definitely a lot of mobility options that are present there. I'd assume there'd be, different ways to engage with the water and stuff like that. Maybe there's obstacles in the water. I'm also curious what happens when the boat or skiff comes in contact with ground at the edge of water. There's a lot of different options there, and I'm curious to see where they go with it. But this is one of those features, once again, it could be a huge thing for future content as well. I don't know. They didn't specifically say that the boats could be used in other parts of Tyria as they did with fishing, so I'm a little bit curious about that. If someone caught that tidbit in the live stream, please comment it in the comments below. But I'm curious to see if this is something we're going to see everywhere, or if this is something that we're going to see in other, future expansions. I know that mounts, I don't think originally could go everywhere in Tyria. I think it was a later patch that did that, but I could be misremembering that as well. But I'm very interested to see what happens. And now it's time to talk about the turtles, which might be kind of out of left field if you didn't watch the stream, but the actual mount they announced was the siege turtle, and technically the boat or skiff is a mount as well if you think about it, but the siege turtle is their mount. It's a 2-person mount, which is super awesome. Obviously this technology of having multiple people on the same mount is something that they're going to be using in different areas. They actually talk a bit about this at the very end of the stream, how this is a pretty big jump in tech for them, and it'll allow them to do more of these kind of fun things like this in the future. But the siege turtle, it looks like a turtle. You'd once again assume it might be pretty good in the water. And the person who talked about it was amazing. He studied turtles for a really long time to get the animations right. Apparently they even walk at the same speed as turtles do on land in Guild Wars 2, which I don't know if it's a level of detail I need in my game, but I'm super excited to know it's there. It's a 2-person vehicle, which is great, and it's called a siege turtle. So I sincerely think that there's going to be a bit of weaponry there that you can have some fun with. I could see someone manning a gun while the other person walks, which could be a lot of fun. And it would be interesting to see how they balance, because it does raise a few questions, but they're questions I'm happy to be asking. All right, so then they talk about new masteries, and I'm so happy that we're talking about masteries. I'm so happy that it's not a piece of content that's been scrapped, or, that's being replaced by a completely new system that's going to revolutionize everything. This is what I like to see. I like to see MMOs, like this isn't even just Guild Wars 2. There's a few games I could mention, Blizzard, that like to invent systems and then reinvent a system that almost does the same thing in the next expansion that took so long to invent that it's not done properly and it just keeps happening and happening. Yes, please just stay with masteries, make new masteries that are cool, and just build on the same system. I think it's such a good idea. It's perfect for horizontal progression, and I'm happy to see it. But they've announced that there's going to be 5 new mastery tracks. We know of 3 of them, one of which will be the siege turtle, one of which will be the skiffs or the boats, and one of which will be fishing. There are 2 that we don't know about, which is actually pretty big to think about, because when you think about the other 3 that were just mentioned, these are kind of like pretty big features, or at least fishing and the boat are pretty changings of the game. And if the last 2 are anything like that, there's actually some pretty big stuff to still be revealed. The one sort of hint that I do kind of see is that it could be something to do with this dragon jade technology that they keep kind of talking about in relation to the story of Cantha. So I could definitely see it being something like that, very similar to some of the living world maps where there's a very specific type of magic or technology that we can interact with, which is a little bit less exciting in my own point of view, but it's definitely something I see having a place in the game. It's often something used to lock content because you have to actually get to this mastery level to progress this or to unlock this, something that they've done in pretty much every expansion. So I could see it. I'm interested to see what's left there though, for sure. All right, so now it's time to talk about the Legendaries. I'll warn you in advance, this is probably the most sour piece of the video, and I think a few people do share this. I saw in the actual live chat that there was a few comments, but as well in the Reddit and stuff like that, there's been a lot of comments since the announcement that kind of share similar thoughts. And I'll start off by saying the main reason I think this is a big issue is that everyone was so excited when they announced that there was going to be a third generation of Legendaries. I think a lot of us kind of thought it was done, and then, hey, there's going to be a third set of Legendaries. That's so exciting. And this has kind of come to rain on the parade a little bit. But let me paint the picture first. So it's been confirmed that we're going to get 16 Legendaries, which is awesome, and that they're going to be kind of stylized to look or themed after Aurene. So very crystally, glowy, and stuff like that. And let me just say, the concept art and the actual, examples they put on screen look absolutely beautiful. They do. They look wonderful. This is the issue, though. They're all going to be themed like that. Every single of these 16 Legendaries is going to be of that theme. And you can even see on screen that a lot of the concept art, they look very similar. They look like a weapon set. And that's an issue, because I think one of the coolest things and things that Guild Wars 2 has gotten the most right in its history is how Legendaries feel. The fact that they're unique, the fact that they have a story to them, especially with this most recent update that does give a bit of lore when you add each of them. And I'm like, so for these new ones, is it going to be almost the same piece of lore for each of this type, part of the collection? I think it devalues the interesting and uniqueness of each of the legendary. It's so cool to have this object that's just it's what it's about. When you think of the moot or the incinerator or something like that, you're like, this is this one item in the game. I have this, and it's so cool. And there's a few exceptions to that rule. Obviously, you look at Twilight and Sunrise, and you look at Dusk or whatever, the swords. I'm probably mixing all the different types of knight. The swords, though, of the first generation, they're kind of a set itself, but that's because it's like 3 additional ones to where there would just be 1, right? Like if it was the situation where there was a set of 2 great swords, once again, that were kind of Aurene themed, like a dark Aurene or a light Aurene or something like that, I think that would be okay. It's the fact that it's all 16 of them that causes the issue. The other issue with this is, God forbid you're someone who doesn't like Aurene. Like they've essentially doubled down on the Aurene factor. I think Aurene's going to be a very key part to the story, and that does kind of make sense. But if you're someone who doesn't like Aurene, you're kind of out of luck for getting a 3rd generation legendary. It's the Aurene show. And to, give some credit where it's due, there's a really cool thing that they're doing where the precursors are very themed after baby Aurene that we know from Heart of Thorns, and then the actual legendaries are themed after grown-up Aurene that we kind of know now. So that's a really cool thing. Like there's elements of this that are so cool. I just wish it was one legendary instead of all of them. Because the other part of this is, you could have had very Cantha themed legendaries. You could have legendaries that were themed after Cantha from Guild Wars 1, some that are more current and relevant to the current story. There's a lot of space that they could have gone with, and they've kind of, taken that away. But I think it sours things that they're all so similar, but I'm happy that they're there. Like, it's better to have legendaries than to not have them at all. I just wish it was more similar to what we've seen in the past. Okay, so now it's time to talk about encounters, the endgame, the PvE, the instance PvE, I should say. This is obviously a big subject for me. This is probably the piece of Guild Wars 2 that I complain about the most, and it's the piece that I play the most, and it's something that I've turned to other games to scratch that itch while playing Guild Wars 2 for the stuff that I think it does really well. But let's get into what's happening. So we'll rip the band-aid off right away. No raids. No raids were mentioned at all. I was not expecting them. I was coming into this thinking raids were already dead. Some people had hope. I thought they were already dead. And replaced by strike missions or whatever. And I think that's exactly what's happened, because they did announce that there will be 5 strike missions. So right on that, there's a positive. There are strike missions. They are not scrapping strike missions to do a whole new thing. They're keeping their idea of strike missions going, and I'm super happy to see it. They've announced that there will be 5 of them, and they've announced that each one will have a hard mode. So they are definitely catering to hardcore players that want that challenge. I do think there's some definite stuff that's missing when I think, the first raids were so fun because they told a story so well. I think it was one of the best ways of telling a story. The environment felt so cool. It played with the Masteries so well, because there was that in-between time where you could do a lot of different cool little fun things with the Masteries that you just don't get with the strike missions as much. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Raids aren't a thing. Strike missions are a thing. And it's weird though, when I was thinking about strike missions during this live stream, it's the first time I ever thought strike missions are trials from Final Fantasy XIV. I don't know why I didn't put that together, but that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trials from Final Fantasy XIV in Guild Wars 2, which, is cool because they're obviously easier to develop, and it is easier to balance one fight for either a hardcore versus not hard, or hard mode versus not hard mode, as opposed to having to do a whole wing or having kind of a weird switch that turns on the one boss or whatever. So I do see the appeal that way. I'm just, I do wish there was raids, but there are not raids, which is all good. Some other things, they talked about how they scale enemies, and I think this is more related to open world stuff, but it could involve instances as well, where they've said in the past, when there's legendary enemies or whatever, like really high epic creatures, they often have really high health and stats and stuff like that, and it makes it really hard to take them on. And what they want to do instead is actually have it so that there's tiers of mechanics that get unlocked the harder the creature. And I think that's a really good philosophy, be it open world or not, that it is more about that as opposed to the stats. I think obviously when you talk about raids and stuff like that, there definitely should be a bump in health, because generally the hard mode players have more DPS, and I think otherwise they're just going to burn through it. But it is fun to play that way, I think, overall. Now let's get to the really bad part. So raids, I was expecting them not to talk about. What I wasn't expecting is that they didn't mention fractals in the entire hour thing. Like, I think a lot of people were kind of stunned by that, or at least I was stunned. I was like, no fractal question mark? Like, not even a conversation about fractals? And it's really weird because they have a Cantha themed fractal that they released recently. And I wonder if that's like, all right, we did our fractal for the expansion already, we don't have to talk about it, or if there is fractals that are going to come and they're going to, like, they just didn't talk about it. But I think at the very least they could have been like, and of course there'll be more fractals to come, like just something like that. But they didn't talk about fractals, and it concerns me that there isn't going to be a fractal, because I think 5-man content is necessary. If it's not dungeons, that's fine, you've made your decision. If it's fractals, though, it has to be fractals. It can't be nothing now. So I definitely think fractals are such a cool piece of content. And we see it in other games like, World of Warcraft, where Mythic Plus gets such, repeat play. There's obviously an audience for that type of content. And I definitely think it's something that they can keep working on, and that they are going to keep working on. But yeah, it was very, very disappointing that they did not mention fractals, and I'm curious to see what the outcome is. They definitely didn't say, hey, fractals are dead or something like that, but it didn't feel great. Moving on to some other features, there is a new guild hall coming. It's going to be Cantha themed because it's in Cantha. There's going to be a similar expedition system to claim it, which is cool, but they've definitely tailored it to work for smaller groups of smaller encounters, which I think is great as someone who's tried to claim some of the other ones with a very small guild. So I'm super excited about that. The other thing, there's going to be water in them as well to really make use of your skiffs and your fishing. Overall, they're going to work the same. I think it's cool that they are adding them, because I think the technology being there is a lot of the work, and having assets that reflect the current expansion is a really cool thing, and it gives guilds something to do. I do think there's room for them obviously to add more features to guilds and stuff like that, but I think it's nice that they did this, and I think it's a good step into Cantha for sure. And this brings us to the elite specs, which in my opinion is the most important part of the expansion. If the expansion didn't have elite specs, even if the expansion didn't have elite specs for every single class, I would say it would be a disappointment, because Elite specs, above all of these other features, adds replayability to a lot of the old content and is something that you'll get to bring forward to all of the new content. You know, when you think of Druid, that was a Heart of Thorns thing, and think about how much playtime and content you got from Path of Fire with it. It's such a big change, and I'm so glad that they're doing it, because I know elite specs have to be one of the hardest things for them to do. They have the technology in a lot of ways, but it's the balancing, it's the art assets to develop all of this. Like there's a lot of change that has to happen, and I'm just super happy to have this. The other thing to point out is that they stated this a few times, that you know, they're looking at breaking their own rules when it comes to elite specs. You know, there's some rules that they had in the past. For instance, we'll talk more about it, but the one that they reveal is the Mesmer. And they talk about Mesmers always having these, you know, different Phantasm clone thingies. And they kind of changed that in this elite spec. And it actually does. It feels very different than all the other Mesmers. And it feels more like a different class than it does an elite spec. And I'm going to just use class instead of profession, because I know that's what they call them in this game. But yeah, that's who I am apparently. I'm just going to say class. But yeah, so that's really cool. They did say that a lot of these are going to be Cantha inspired, which obviously makes a lot of sense. The teaser is for the Mesmer, and it uses a dagger, not a spear. And I will state, I was firmly in the spear camp because I wanted to keep hope that one day we will see some of these new weapons on land. You know, even the water weapons on land versus completely new weapons would be welcome. Maybe there's still room for that, but it was a dagger. That being said, the actual spec looks really cool, and I'm strictly like not Mesmer person. Like I play Chrono back in Heart of Thorns because I needed to for my group. But I definitely don't choose to play Chrono, and this looks really cool. It's all about throwing daggers. It looks, you know, kind of, you stack these projectile daggers, you know, they're kind of your clones or whatever, but they're daggers that kind of stack around you. It actually looks very much like the Sage in Final Fantasy, now that I think of it. But yeah, it looks really fun. It's definitely I'd say more of a power DPS by the looks of it, but it definitely has a lot of cool skills, a lot of fun damage from range. Some of the ones I really liked were the, the Blades of 1,000 Cuts looks really cool. I think that's the ultimate that it does. And then there's also like a blade rain kind of effect that looks super, super cool as well. Obviously, you kind of need to play the spec to know how it feels, but I think overall they did a really good job with this. And then just a brief note on some other things that didn't really get talked about. We heard about alliances for World v World, but we already kind of knew about that. And then SPVP really didn't get much talk at all in this. And like, I will say that elite specs do, you know, give a breath of fresh air into both of those game modes, which is great. But it would be great to see them still kind of cater a bit to those types of content. I know when I look at everything objectively from the point of view of ArenaNet, I'm like, hey, most of their players probably play open world story content. That is where their resources should go. And it makes sense. It does, you know, sting when you look at, you know, SPVP, when you look at World v World, when you look at raids. It's a little unfortunate, but I do get it, and I can see it from their point of view as well. But yeah, it's a little disappointing for sure. So they kind of closed down the show with a last few tidbits of information. They had Colin Johansson kind of summarize everything, and it's so impressive how good he is on camera compared to everyone else. And in my opinion, he's got so much confidence, like the smile, he really knows what he's talking about. And it was, I don't know, maybe I'm just super excited to see him in the chair again, but it was great to have him there, and I thought it was a lot of fun having him kind of give a recap of everything, and you could see the excitement he had for specific features, which I think was really nice to see, and it really humanized a lot of this for sure. But some last little tidbits: they gave a teaser for the next elite spec, which looks like a necromancer with a pistol, which I think is really cool. And if you look closely, it also has kind of these vials maybe or grenades on the belt area, and you could definitely see it being kind of like maybe like they throw vials of potions or like poisons or something like that. That would fit very thematically in with a necromancer, so I'm very interested to see what happens there. They talk about the upgrade for DirectX that's going to happen eventually, and that they're excited to see where that goes in the future. And they came out and said, hey, End of Dragons does not mean End of Guild Wars 2. And I made a video about a month ago now where I was speculating that. I was like, is that what this means? Is it time for Guild Wars 3? No, they said for sure not. They said that they're looking to the future with a lot of this technology stuff that they're doing, like DirectX, the multi-person mount and stuff like that. There's a lot of exciting things that they're doing for the future, and they're doubling down on Guild Wars 2, which is just super great to hear. And I think it's very refreshing for developers to just say that instead of just having people guess about it. The last thing they want to talk about is the betas for Elite Specs. I think they said there'd be 4 total betas, but the first one happens really soon, actually, on August 17th to August 21st. You can play the first 3 Elite Specs, one of them being the Mesmer, probably the Necromancer, and probably another one that's going to be teased. The big thing here, though, is that you can play it, like everyone can play it, even free-to-play players can play it. So if you're someone interested in Guild Wars 2 and you're interested in what I've just talked about, make a free-to-play account, test out the beta, use my links. Okay, that's the last one I'm gonna say. But yeah, it's super cool that they're gonna do that, and I'll definitely be getting some footage for the channel. So if you don't play it, you can check it out here for sure as well. But yeah, that's the video. Probably really long. I also want to say my throat. If you were at the stream on Saturday, you'll know that I've been having a fight with my throat. I think I lost it at points during this video. There's definitely some up and down in terms of my tone. I apologize for that. Hopefully my videos aren't always this weird sounding, but hopefully this was enjoyable. If you do enjoy this type of content, be sure to like the video, subscribe. It helps the channel. But yeah, with that said, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.